Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Learning Israel webinar program. I'm your host, Rabbi Ari Enkin, coming to you live from Beit Shemesh, Israel. Tonight, Jewish history. It's Wednesdays, Jewish history. As we do each and every class, please confirm that you can hear me okay, that you see the first slide, and we'll get going in just a moment. Welcome, Nico from Rotterdam, and Beverly from New York. And Bulgaria, Todor, welcome. Janine, welcome. Rachel, welcome. Barcelona, ¿qué tal? Welcome. Okay, everyone hears me around the world, so I think we're ready to go. In Germany, they can hear me. Thank you for that. And Michal, Chrissy, Chach, I think that's how you pronounce your name. In Germany, that's Chach. And Julie, wow, a lot of sign-ins this evening. Everyone's confirming they can hear me okay. I'm so happy when you all sign in and let me know your name and where you're from. And yes, Chach is Chach. That's Chatch. That's a name I've never heard. But of course, in any event, welcome to the webinar program. Okay, we'll get going. I think attendance is basically peaked. Everyone is here. Here we go. We are talking tonight about the Rambam, Maimonides. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you have to understand that tonight's class is about the most central, gigantic, rabbinic figure, perhaps of all time. You have to understand that we've had seminars on rabbis in the past, great rabbis, very great rabbis. But you have to understand that a class on the Rambam basically means a class on the greatest rabbi that has ever lived, within reason. But definitely tonight's rabbinical figure is not just another rabbi. It's not just another great rabbi. It may very well be the greatest rabbi, and probably without hesitation, the greatest rabbi of the Middle Ages. That's Maimonides. Rabbi Moses Maimonides, also known as Rabbi Moses ben Maimon. Ben is meaning son of. Maimon was his father's name, and that's right, his last name is Maimonides because last names were often made based on who your father was. Or a more colloquially, I think is the word, colloquial, more commonly known as the Rambam. Rabbi Moses Maimonides is known in synagogues and yeshivas and Jewish scholarship and Jewish parlance with the name the Rambam. So, hope you're going to enjoy tonight's presentation. I hope you learn a lot. Listen closely, fasten your seatbelts, because again, rarely is there a class on such a gigantic and central figure. And indeed, in these 45 to 60 minutes, I've tried to cover really almost everything, minus, I will tell you right now, there is not so much on the controversy of the Rambam's works. Very rare do you have a rabbi who is both a legal decisor, what we call a posek. He is a legal authority, a halachic authority, and yet at the same time a philosopher, not merely of any philosophy, but a student of Aristotle. So he was very, very, very controversial, and the controversial components of his books, the reception of his books, the burning of his books. We're not going to get into too much of that today. If there's time, there's a very short video I will show you that does deal with that issue. But yes, he was a controversial rabbi at the time. After he died, the world realized they were crazy for mocking him, for burning his books, for ostracizing him, and the like. Fortunately, often this only happens after the person dies. But in his life, he was subject to much turbulence. Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, Moshe, a Talmudist. He knew the entire Talmud by heart. Halachist means Jewish religious law. A physician, a philosopher, a communal leader, known in the Jewish world by the acronym Rambam. Rambam is an acronym for the words Rabbi Moses ben Maimon. Rambam, Rabbi Moses ben Maimon in Hebrew, the first letter of each of those words makes up Rambam. And to the greater world, he was known as Maimonides, and he was one of the most important figures in the history of Torah scholarship. On his gravestone in Tiberias, in northern Israel, which we'll see more about probably later in the program, on his tombstone it's written, "From Moses to Moses, none arose as Moses." A play on words, based on the Rambam's first name, and of course, comparing him to Moses of the Bible. Today, many hospitals and schools across the globe are named after Maimonides. Almost every city with a Jewish population has a Maimonides hospital or Maimonides institution of some sort. And his works continue to be poured over daily in yeshivas and in synagogues around the world. The Rambam was born on the 14th day of Nisan, that's the day before Passover, in the year 1135 in Cordoba, Spain. So we have a listener this evening listening into our class from Barcelona. So to you in Barcelona, I would say it's worth your while to go to southern Spain, to the area of Malaga, or you call it Andalusia, and check out some of the cities and sites we're going to be speaking about this evening, because you will see memorials and museums dedicated to the Rambam in southern Spain. So everyone should go see it one day, especially if you're in Barcelona and you're going to take a trip south to the coast, the southern coast, and enjoy the sun and the beaches of Malaga. You'll definitely want to stop by the Rambam sites. And again, I will share more details about this. First detail over here is Cordoba, where the Rambam was born. The Rambam was a descendant of a distinguished and scholarly family that was able to trace its ancestry to Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, the author of the Mishnah. And by extension, this means that the Rambam was a descendant of King David. And by extension, this means he came from the tribe of Judah. At the conclusion of his commentary on the Mishnah, and by the way, the Rambam wrote many, many works. We're going to get into that later on. But the primary works is his commentary on the Mishnah and his Mishnah Torah, which is the book of Jewish law, of all Jewish law. Now, in the end of his commentary on the Mishnah, the Rambam enumerates his ancestry 8 generations back, noting that they were all scholars and rabbis. His father, Maimon, was a judge in the Jewish court of Cordoba. He was one of the senior rabbis of the city he lived. He was famous not only for his vast Torah knowledge, but also for his general scholarship, especially in math and astronomy. That was Rabbi Maimon. Rabbi Maimon was his son's teacher. He taught his son Moshe, scripture, Talmud, and every aspect of Jewish scholarship. And he also provided him with a well-rounded education that included training in worldly affairs. It was at the suggestion of his father that the young Moses immersed himself in the study of philosophy and medicine, fields in which he was later to attain world renown. Before we go on to our next slide, I'll bring your attention to the picture you should be seeing on your slide right now, with the Maimonides picture showing that he was born in 1135 and died in 1204. And below that, one of Maimonides' most famous quotes, "You must accept the truth from whatever source it comes." The background of the saying, my friends, is the misconception or belief amongst many Jewish scholars, not everybody, but there's a belief amongst many Jewish scholars that you can only accept truth from Jewish religious sources. Maimonides taught us, no, we don't have the answers to everything. When non-Jewish scholars share knowledge and information, it very well may be true, and if it is, accept it, even though it wasn't from a Jewish religious source. So you see, the Maimonides was definitely a trailblazer in terms of his open-mindedness, open to the outside world, very, very pro the outside world and worldly affairs, which is in distinction to most other rabbis that were against worldly affairs, that were against secular education, that were against reading texts or accepting truth from anything else besides religious Jewish texts or scholars. The Rambam was the trailblazer, and it's in his path that rabbis like myself follow today. Rabbis who believe in secular education, who believe in excellence in worldly affairs as well as Jewish religious affairs, without compromising commitment to Jewish law. That is the school of thought that I personally subscribe to. Let's go on to our next slide. Okay, so we're going to get into a map in a moment, but just some more information about the Rambam. We'll start with that. The young Rambam Moses was barely bar mitzvah, about 12 years old, when fanatical Almohads, a fanatical Islamic group, cult, terrorists, I don't know what the right word is for the Almohads, and they conquered, these fanatical Muslims conquered Cordoba in 1148. And these ruthless terrorists tolerated no other religion other than their own. Is that ISIS, gentlemen? Ladies and gentlemen, did I just mention ISIS? Oh yeah, Almohads, not ISIS. Sorry, I don't want to lose focus. Chuckle, chuckle, chuckle. So ISIS wasn't the first. We had the Almohads that also had no tolerance for anybody but themselves. And the Jews had options. The options were convert to Islam or die, and if you're lucky, just get expelled from your native land. So at least they gave the Jews choice, okay? The Jews were given the excruciating alternative of either surrendering their faith or their life. And if they're lucky, they can get away with both if they abandon their homeland where they lived for many, many centuries and many generations, and they were not able to bring their possessions with them. The vast majority of these Jews, and among them was Rabbi Maimon and his family and his son Moses, they chose exile and they left Cordoba. Those who could not leave, those who did not leave, were often put to death. Some became insincere converts to Islam, merely outwardly. All the while, secretly in their hearts, they remained Jews in the privacy of their home. These people that I just mentioned, that observed the Torah, observed Judaism privately in their own home, they were known as Anusim or Maranos, and these people continue to exist today. Some were Maranos and Anusim from Christian pressures, some were Maranos and Anusim from Islamic pressures. And these people, as I mentioned, continue to exist today in Spain. These people who never left, but pretended to convert to Christianity or Islam, but continued to observe the Jewish religion in their basements where nobody was looking. And these people can be found today in southern Spain. There's a nice concentration, a rather large, proportionately large concentration of these Maranos and Anusim in southern Spain and Malaga. And in fact, as people who've been to this class before, online class, who join me regularly, might have heard in the past that I've been to southern Spain many times. And when I walk around Spain with my kippah on my head, more than once, ladies and gentlemen, more than once, I'd get a tap on the shoulder. I turn around to a person wearing a cross who would tell me, "Shalom, shalom, I come from Jewish people." So these people continue today, and many of them, yes, do observe the Jewish religion in the privacy of their homes, not realizing that they're following the Jewish religion. They just believe that was part of their upbringing. For example, we're Christians, we go to church on Sundays, or we're Muslims, we go to the mosque on Fridays, but Friday nights, we have to light candles. They don't know why they're lighting candles, but we know why they're lighting candles. They're lighting candles because Jewish people light candles before the Sabbath begins every single Friday night. So that is just a drop in the bucket of the world of Anusim and Maranos. Those who want to read further should definitely look it up online. There is plenty to learn about these people. And again, they are all around southern Spain, especially in the Malaga area. Rabbi Maimon and his family, they left Cordoba and they wandered about from city to city in southern Spain without being able to stay in any one place for a long period, because these Almohadian people, fanatics, they took over all of southern Spain. After 10 years of running from place to place, they joined a group of fugitives who headed toward North Africa and eventually settled in 1159 in Fez, which was then the capital of Morocco. But things weren't peaceful yet. So we see that the Rambam lived in many, many places in southern Spain, all in the Malaga area primarily, and then northern Morocco. And there are traces of the Rambam having been to these places in all these various cities like Cordoba, Seville, and Fez. After 5 years in Fez, again they had to leave because of Islamic intolerance and persecution. And they again became wandering Jews. They had no home. So they went first to Jerusalem, and then Hebron, and then down to Egypt. The Holy Land was desolate and unpopulated, and we had problems in the Holy Land as well in those days. We had the Crusaders. And the Crusaders did not let the Jews live in peace either. So you see, the Jews were getting it bad in those years from both the Christians and the Muslims. Things were not very good in those years for Jews anywhere in the world if they lived with Christians or Muslims. They spent 3 days in Jerusalem in prayer at the Western Wall. They went to Hebron for 1 day, and again down to Egypt, where they settled in Fostad. I think that was the capital back then. It was near Cairo. It was a major city of governance back then in Egypt. And the family of Rabbi Maimon finally found a haven, somewhat. Unlike other Muslim countries, the Jews in Egypt were granted complete religious and civil freedom. They were allowed to develop their religious, cultural, and communal life, as well as to engage in commerce without any restrictions or interference. It was here, in Egypt, that Rabbi Moses wrote some of the masterpieces that the Jewish people are forever indebted to him for. I'll take your attention to the maps on your screen. You can see in the top picture the Almohads, the fanatical Muslim cult that knew only death or conversion. They, you can see, took up North Africa as well as most of Spain. On the bottom map, you can see the migration and settlement of Spanish Jews, including the route that the Rambam took, going from southern Spain to Morocco and continuing on to the Holy Land. So we see the map of the Jewish migration as well over here. Okay, so take a look at that map for another second or two, and we'll be going on to our next slide. So, I'll just bring to your attention that the statue you see on your screen now, the slide, that's a statue of the Rambam, which, if I'm not mistaken, is in Seville, or is it Cordoba? Maybe it's Seville. I don't remember, I confess. But that is a famous statue that you can go see today in southern Spain. I think it's Seville. But anyways, it's there. You look up the statue of the Rambam, and you'll find exactly where it is. So the Rambam and family are barely settled in Egypt, just beginning to enjoy what they thought was a life of freedom and peace. But unfortunately, tragedy struck the Maimon family. After a few months after their arrival in Fostad, Egypt, Rabbi Maimon passed away. Rabbi Maimon was the breadwinner of the family. And Moses, as mentioned earlier, was very close to his father, who was also his teacher. Moses deeply mourned the loss of his great father, who was his teacher and most important influence in his life. Rabbi Maimon himself, by the way, wrote a commentary on the Talmud, which his son Moshe mentions in his introduction to the Mishnah, which he used as a source in the preparation of his own works. However, if I'm not mistaken, Rabbi Maimon's commentary is no longer extant today. It was lost or what have you, and I don't think there is a complete work of Rabbi Maimon in existence. His younger brother, Moshe, the Rambam's younger brother, David, took upon himself the responsibility of providing the financial support for the entire family. And he did this with the intention as well that his brother Moses, who was a genius and the rising rabbinic star in the family, Moses would not have to work and would be able to devote himself to his studies and write his works. David, the brother, became a jewel merchant, a jeweler, importing gems and precious stones from India. And he was very successful, and the family lived very comfortably. But soon later, again, tragedy struck the Maimon family, and David was killed. On a business trip to India, the ship on which he was traveling was caught in a storm. It was shipwrecked, and David drowned. And with him went the entire family fortune. And then there was no choice. Moshe Maimonides had no choice but to become the breadwinner of the family, to provide for his mother and if there were any other brothers or sisters, which we are unsure of who there was else in the family, but he had to provide the livelihood for the family. However, as a result of Moses' incessant study and his grief over his brother's death, he himself became very ill, and then he was bedridden for several months. He was unable to provide support for his family, nor was he able to devote himself to his studies and to his writings. When he finally recovered, he then went into medicine. He became a doctor in order to provide for his families. The Rambam did not deem it proper. Listen to this, another remarkable position taken by Maimonides. The Rambam did not deem it proper to obtain monetary benefits or receive salary for his Torah knowledge. He believed the Torah should be studied and taught for free, not for financial gain. Hence, he devoted himself to being a doctor for his livelihood, for his finances, for a salary, while he would teach Torah for free. He was so successful in his profession as a doctor, he gained a tremendous reputation, and that the Grand Vizier, al-Fadhil, eventually took him, as well as the Sultan of Egypt, Saladin, as their personal physician. So talk about success for the Rambam. Here we have a Jew, a rabbi, a scholar who becomes the chief doctor for the Islamic government of Egypt, for the Sultan. Gives you an idea of who the Rambam was. On to our next slide. Had the Rambam, we're going to talk now a bit more of the works the Rambam had written. If the Rambam had written no other work besides his famous commentary on the Mishnah, that alone would have given Moses Maimonides his place in Jewish history forever. He would have been immortalized for that alone. But as soon as he completed his commentary on the Mishnah, he began a more ambitious project. And he was essentially the first rabbi to take all of Jewish law and combine it, compile it into one systematic book, text. There was someone a little bit earlier than Moses Maimonides who attempted to compile all of Jewish law, and his name was Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, known as the Rif. For those who've been keeping up with us every week in the history class, you might recall that we once had a class entirely on Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, the Rif. And Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, he was the first to enter the world of codifying the laws of the Talmud, of codifying Jewish law. And the problem with the Rif, with Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi's compilation of Jewish law, is that it was beyond the ability of the average person. Only the greatest scholars were able to enjoy the work that he compiled and were able to learn from it and to derive Jewish law from it. What Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi did, as you can see in the screen below, is he made a text that is essentially, and it looks identical to the Talmud. You look at your picture over there on your screen, you should see a Talmud text over there on the bottom right of the pictures, but it's actually not a Talmud. It looks exactly like the Talmud, but it's not. It's Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi's commentary there in the center, his compilation of all of Jewish law, in which he went through the entire Talmud and simply recorded, took out the legal pieces and ignored all the debates, the arguments, and the stories of the Talmud. So that's what you have over there on your screen. But again, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi's compilation was inaccessible to the common folk. Okay? So as the years passed, the pressing need for a more systematically arranged, clear-cut, practical guide of Jewish law was needed. There was need. And therefore it was the crowning accomplishment of Maimonides to present the first comprehensive, all-encompassing, topically arranged code of Jewish law. It was the first of its kind. It was the only thing around. Clarity, lucidity, everything you want. You see a picture on top of your screen over there, a picture of an English version of Maimonides' work on Jewish law. The title of the work you see there is Mishnah Torah, but make no mistake, don't be confused. The Rambam's Mishnah Torah actually has nothing to do with the Mishnah. The book Mishnah Torah is not Maimonides' commentary on the Mishnah. There essentially is no name for Maimonides' commentary on the Mishnah. The book called the Mishnah Torah, again, is unrelated to Mishnah. It's unrelated to his commentary on the Mishnah. The Rambam's legal code, where he took all of Jewish law and arranged it by topic, is coincidentally called the Mishnah Torah. And the words of the Rambam himself, as he writes in his introduction to the Mishnah Torah, he writes, "At this time, the sufferings of our people have increased. The pressing need of the moment supersedes every other consideration. The wisdom of the wise has vanished, and the wisdom of our learned men is concealed. Hence the commentaries, compilations of laws, the responsa, the questions and answers of the earlier rabbis, the Gaonim, which they thought were easy to understand, have in our times become difficult to understand. And there are only a few individuals who are able to comprehend them properly. For this reason," writes Maimonides, "I, Moshe ben Maimon, the Sephardic Jew, decided to compile a book of what is prohibited and what is permitted, and all the other laws of the Torah, all in clear language and concise style, so that the entire oral Torah will be systematically arranged for all. My purpose in composing this code is that no man shall have any need to resort to any other book on any matter of Jewish law. And therefore I have called this work the Mishnah Torah, which means in English, second law to the Torah. For a man should first read the written Torah and then read this code, and he will know from it the entire oral law, the entire Talmud, without the need of reading any other book." Wow! Very, very bold of the Rambam, very, very controversial of the Rambam to say, hey, I'm writing a book. All you need is my book. Put away the Talmud. You won't need it anymore because my book will teach you the Talmud and everything you need to know. Those are very, very controversial words on the Rambam's part. We'll go to the next slide over here. More about this Mishnah Torah, more about the Code of Jewish Law that Maimonides put together. Getting a question right now from Michal, do I believe that? I think Michal is asking, do I believe that Maimonides believed that his book was all you need? And the answer is yes, I do believe that Maimonides thought, believed, attempted, wanted that there would be no burning need for Talmudic study anymore, certainly not Talmudic study by the masses. And the whole Jewish world would be able to live as Jews with his book alone. So yes, I do believe that that's what Maimonides intended, exactly as he said. But Maimonides was essentially wrong on that note, on that point. Talmud study still remains very, very needed, not just for rabbinic scholars, but even for the masses, for the, I would say the learned masses, the learned lay folk. Talmud still is very, very necessary, and it's difficult to be a well-rounded Jew with Jewish law alone without any Talmudic background. So as we said, Maimonides was the first one to index the entire body of oral law. He compiled the words, the laws in both the Talmuds, the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud. He went through the Midrashim. He went through the Gaonim. He even went through the Kabbalistic texts and compiled it all in a logical and systematic fashion. The laws of Shabbat, for example, are all gathered in the third volume of the Mishnah Torah, which I mentioned earlier is available in English, in a good English, as in the section called Zmanim, times, containing all laws pertaining to Shabbat and holidays. There are 30 chapters in which Maimonides compiles the laws of Shabbat. And each chapter is divided into bite-sized subsections. Maimonides codified the laws of Shabbat, holidays, prayer, dietary laws, you name it, it's there. It's there. There is no law that could really apply to a Jew. Certainly not in those days. Of course, in our day and age with more modern problems, the modern world, so the Rambam's books are simply not enough because the Rambam doesn't deal with questions that we deal with. Airplane travel in Jewish law, car travel in Jewish law, internet in Jewish law, business. I mean, there's so much in the modern world that Maimonides simply doesn't cover because he couldn't have. It wasn't relevant when he lived. But Maimonides' books does indeed cover anything a Jew would ever need from the perspective of Jewish law in his day and age. There's also a lot of material in the Rambam on eating healthy, Fitness, he was very into that. I guess his doctor, being a physician and doctor, that shows in his works on health and fitness. Mental health was very important to him. And he always preached that anything you do, whether you're at work in a secular world or you're in the place of worship, everything should be permeated with holiness and godliness. The health and well-being of the body, Maimonides writes, is part of the service of God. The Mishnah Torah also incorporates the basics of Jewish thought and belief. Another unique component of the volumes is that they are not limited to laws that pertain to our day and age only, which actually constitute only a small part of the Torah's 613 commandments. But the Rambam also included laws. Listen to this. This is also what makes the Rambam unique, that in his code of Jewish law, he included the laws that will apply in the Messianic era. He writes about the coming of the Messiah and what will be, and how the temple will be rebuilt, and how peace will reign in the world, and all the relevant legal material surrounding the arrival of the Messiah. May it be speedily in our days. He was the first to do that, to talk about how the temple service will run when the Messiah comes. So in his era, and in this area, Maimonides was more than a trailblazer. To this very day, the Mishnah Torah remains the only work of this scope. There's no other work that's ever been authored that covers the entire corpus of Jewish law, especially noteworthy as mentioned, the Messianic era. Maimonides also placed great emphasis on making his works available and understandable to all Jews, whether they were scholars or laymen. He also omitted sources for the sake of brevity, though later scholars compiled sources for every statement in the Mishnah Torah. Since Maimonides, many subsequent scholars have analyzed every word and even every letter that Maimonides had written. They discuss at length why Maimonides chose to include certain laws, why he wrote one law before another, meaning the order of what he wrote, why he did so, and why he included certain laws in one volume but not the other. Some have speculated that the body of commentary on Maimonides' volumes could reach the same quantity as Talmudic commentary. So, wow, breathtaking, huge. You'll see on your screen another book on Maimonides' writings by Aryeh Kaplan, Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, where he discusses Maimonides' treatise, Maimonides' essay on the 13 principles of Jewish faith. The Rambam took 13 principles, 13 concepts, and said this is the basis of all Jewish faith. Those who believe in these 13 are Jewish, and those who don't accept any of the 13, well, they're outside the camp. Okay, so there you have it, folks, on the Mishnah Torah. But get this. Even before he wrote the Mishnah Torah, he wrote another book. Keep in mind, we spoke about the commentary on the entire Mishnah. We spoke about the Mishnah Torah just now, but there was yet another book that he wrote that contained the biblical Talmudic sources for all the mitzvot of the Torah, for all the commandments of the Torah. What he does, Maimonides, in his book of commandments, is he goes through each of the 613 commandments, explains briefly what the commandment is, what it entails, how it applies, etc., etc. It's called the Sefer HaMitzvot, the Book of Commandments. As you can see on your screen, it too is available in English. Okay, so it was written before the Mishnah Torah. Some call it an introduction of sorts to the Mishnah Torah, but it is also a valuable work in its own right, and is the second of his three major works on Jewish law: the Mishnah, as I mentioned, and the Mishnah Torah. The main objective of the Sefer HaMitzvot that he wrote was to just enumerate, what are the 613 commandments of the Torah, because, believe it or not, it's actually unclear what the 613 commandments of the Torah really are. Why that is so, I don't think we have time to go into now, but yes, we do know that there are 613 commandments, but we didn't always know what those 613 are. And Maimonides is one of the few, not the only one, but one of the few to go through the Bible, to go through the Torah, and tell us this verse means it's a commandment. This verse means it's not a commandment. See, there are many things in the Torah that are commandments, And there are other things in the Torah that aren't commandments, although it's good advice, valuable wisdom, and the like. So Maimonides tells us what is an actual commandment and what is more advisory in nature. These 613 commandments that the Torah contains are subdivided into two classes, two groups. There's 248 positive commandments, meaning thou shalt do, and 365 negative commandments, meaning thou shalt not do's. Maimonides also authored the famous, or in some circles, infamous Guide for the Perplexed, the Moreh Nevuchim. It too is available in English, and that was the foundational work on Jewish philosophy that was based on Aristotle, which got the Rambam into lots of hot water. He also wrote a famous document known as a letter to Yemenite Jews, where he wrote to the Yemenite Jewish community in Yemen, and he encouraged them to keep the faith even though they were undergoing severe persecution. There are other letters and works that the Rambam wrote. He also wrote the Oath for Physicians and various medical texts. They are available. They're hard to get, but they are available. Some of them are online, but the later texts, I shouldn't say later, I don't know what the dates are, but these less common texts are not available in English. They're only available in Hebrew. But in English, you have the Guide for the Perplexed, you have the Book of Commandments, and you have the Mishnah Torah. The Rambam's commentary on the Mishnah is available in parts in English. Now we're going to talk about the Lubavitcher Rebbe for a moment, the rabbi of the Chabad movement, or the Lubavitch movement, or also known as the Chabad Lubavitch movement. Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who died in 1994, he was one of the biggest modern-day fans of the Rambam. And in the spring of 1984, the Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Schneerson, who lived in Brooklyn, New York, he called for a worldwide innovation of daily study of the Rambam's works. He wanted it for every man, woman, and child. And he created a system whereby everyone studies a portion of Maimonides' work on Jewish law, the Mishnah Torah. He wanted the entire Jewish world to study the Mishnah Torah. And while many people have been turning to the 14-volume Mishnah Torah to supplement their study to the Talmud, it was not being studied as a text on its own. Maimonides' work in that regard was somewhat neglected. It was not used as a text on its own. It was only used as a springboard from Talmudic discussion. And part of that reason was because Maimonides included many laws that were not relevant for today and will only apply when the Messiah comes. So people perhaps were not as all over it as they could have been. So it was for this reason the Rebbe wanted people to be all over the Rambam. He wanted the Rambam to be well-read, to be fluent in people's mouths, to be well-recognized, and he created a system whereby every individual would study the Rambam. What was that system? Well, the Rebbe suggested that the Mishnah Torah be studied straight from cover to cover, 14 volumes from beginning to end. And he created a 3-track schedule that anyone could choose a schedule, a track, in which you could study and complete Maimonides. For the advanced scholars, the Rebbe suggested 3 chapters of Maimonides per day, which would allow one to complete the entire Mishnah Torah in less than a year. For those who are unable to study 3 chapters a day, he suggested 1 chapter a day, which would have you complete the Rambam in about 3 years. And for those who couldn't even do that, the Rebbe suggested they study the Book of Commandments, that Sefer HaMitzvot that we learned so much about a moment ago. And by studying the commandments, as Maimonides writes them out, one would be very familiar with all of Jewish law and all the commandments of the Torah. I myself, I don't want to brag, but I'm not a big follower of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He was a great rabbi, but I'm not one of his followers. I'm not a Lubavitcher Hasid, not Hasidic. The Lubavitcher people today all around the world see the Rambam just like the Rebbe told them to. But nevertheless, I myself took upon myself way back when to study the 3 chapters per day, and I completed the entire Mishnah Torah in a year in accordance with that track. On that note, we have some time. I'm going to show you the video. It's not a long video at all, but it discusses the controversy that the Rambam faced. It's a video by world famous historian Rabbi Beryl Wine. And again, it's a small installment on the Rambam, most notably, as I mentioned, the controversies surrounding his books. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as I find this video, as I get it out for you. Where is it? Come on, where's this video? Come on, the video on the Rambam. Going through all my videos right now. Don't know why I can't find it. There it is. Here it goes. Enjoy. See you in 3 minutes.
JewishHistory.org presents Rabbi Beryl Wine's 5,000 Years of Jewish History. One video clip at a time. Clip number 34, The Controversy over Maimonides.
The works of Maimonides did not receive universal approbation. There were many that disagreed with his philosophy. They disagreed with the use of philosophy to try and explain Torah. There were others that disagreed with his temerity in codifying the entire Torah. Like, who is he? And finally, there were those that were small-minded and were jealous of his success and influence. Because of this, during the lifetime of the Rambam, during the lifetime of Maimonides, he was so great that they were afraid to attack him head-on. But after his death, for the next 50 years, there raged a tremendous battle between those that were pro-Maimonides and those that were anti-Maimonides. And the anti-Maimonides people went to great lengths to discredit him. Finally, in their religious zeal, they informed the Catholic Church that Maimonides had written anti-Catholic, anti-Christian works. The Church took all of the books of Maimonides that were present and burned them. When that happened, the Jewish world recoiled in horror. And really what happened is that shortly thereafter, King Louis IX of France burned all the copies of the Talmud, basically saying, you know, if you can burn one book, you can burn all the books. Maimonides came out of this unscathed. His reputation exists for all generations. And he himself wrote in a personal letter, he said, time will pass, all of the enmities and jealousies and pettiness of the generation will go to the grave with them. And then the books will have to stand on their own. Either they will be accepted or not. Jewish history has proved not only the acceptance of the books and the acceptance of Maimonides as the chief codifier of Jewish law, but of his greatness, his nobility, and his eternal influence on Judaism. He also influenced the world generally. He wrote treatises on medicine and pharmacology. His philosophy was studied. The church itself translated many of his works and adopted and adapted them. Thomas Aquinas, the famous philosopher of Catholicism, himself used the works of Maimonides in order to come to some sort of idea regarding biblical philosophy. Maimonides died in 1204, but he lives on forever in the hearts and minds of the Jewish people. Thank you for watching. I'm Beryl Wine.
For more on Jewish history, go to JewishHistory.org.
Well, folks, maybe you can see me now. Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. Well, on that note, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something from the video. So on that note, we're going to stop over here. I hope you enjoyed this talk on the Rambam. I hope you learned a lot. You had a greater appreciation of who this giant was. And as we say, each and every week at the end of our webinar. Shalom ulehitraot. See you next week.